Psychopath, lunatic, crazy. These are names we use when describing serial killers. However, murderers who go ahead to eat their victims are a different kind of crazy. Needless to say, they strike fear into the hearts of ordinary citizens. But what happens when they get locked up? Do they live in constant fear for their lives? Do they become targets and have to live looking over their shoulders? Or are they also feared by their fellow inmates? Let's find out what really happens to cannibals in prison. Jeffrey Dahmer.
It's Jeffrey Dahmer, the serial killer and cannibal whose saga of evil has been given new life in the hit Netflix series Monster.
He is pure evil, but you'd never know it by looking at him. But when you hear him, that's another story. His killing field was Milwaukee, and he got away with murder for more than a decade.
Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer is arguably the most famous cannibal in history. From his nicknames, Milwaukee Cannibal or the Milwaukee Monster, it's clear as day that he caused the residents of Milwaukee sleepless nights. With 17 deaths to his name, Jeffrey Dahmer could only be described as a heartless monster. So who exactly was Jeffrey Dahmer? What triggered him to become the monster that he turned out to be? How was he arrested? And what was his life in jail like? Jeffrey Dahmer was born May 21, 1960, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Much has been said about his parents and their possible role in creating the monster that everyone now knows. His dad, Lionel Herbert Dahmer, was a chemistry student and later a research chemist. During most of Dahmer's childhood, his dad's studies kept him away from his son. This means that he spent a lot of time with his mom, Joyce Annette Dahmer, a teletype machine instructor. Dahmer's mom had her fair share of troubles as she suffered from depression, demanded constant attention, and spent an increasing amount of time in bed. Therefore, neither parent devoted much time to their son. At elementary school, Dahmer was regarded as quiet and timid, meaning he had few friends. Interestingly, from an early age, Dahmer manifested an interest in dead animals. According to his dad, Dahmer was oddly thrilled by the sound the bones made and became so preoccupied with animal bones that one time he even asked what would happen if chicken bones were placed in bleach. From his freshman year at Revere High School, Dahmer was seen as an outcast as his troubles at home got the better of him, and he finally fell into alcohol. His parents constantly fought, leading them to finally get a divorce in 1978. It was that same year that Dahmer would murder his first victim, a hitchhiker named Stephen Mark Hicks, just 3 weeks after his graduation from high school. This murder set him on a path that would see him take 16 more lives. According to Dahmer, he began to actively seek victims, most of whom he encountered in or around gay bars, and would typically lure them to his grandmother's home in West Allis, Wisconsin. He would drug his victims, and once they were unconscious, he strangled them to death. He would then dismember their bodies and dispose of the remains in the trash. However, he retained their skulls before pulverizing them several months later. So sick was the Milwaukee Monster that he sometimes kissed and talked to the severed heads of his victims while he dismembered the remainder of their bodies. Dahmer's reign of terror would come to an end on July 22, 1991, after his attempt to kill his 18th victim, Tracy Edwards, failed, and he was subsequently arrested.
Milwaukee police found body parts in a North Side apartment, and now they wonder if they've uncovered some kind of death factory. Police found parts of bodies, leading them to believe the man they arrested is a mass murderer.
Surprisingly, Dahmer waived his right to have a lawyer present throughout his interrogations, adding he wished to confess to his crimes. According to him, he had created this horror and wanted to do everything to put an end to it. The Milwaukee Monster even confessed to having consumed the hearts, liver, biceps, and thighs of some of his victims. Dahmer was charged and later pleaded guilty in court. The courtroom was filled with drama during Dahmer's sentencing as his victims' families expressed their grief. There was more shock as Dahmer's attorney announced his client wished to address the court. Dahmer then approached a lectern and read from a statement prepared by himself and his defense as he faced the judge.
I didn't ever want freedom. Frankly, I wanted death for myself. This was a case to tell the world that I did what I did not for reasons of hate. I hated no one. I knew I was sick or evil or both. Now I believe I was sick.
Dahmer even revealed that he knew his time in prison would be hell. I know my time in prison will be terrible, but I deserve whatever I get because of what I have done, he told the court, and it seems he was not wrong. For the first year of his incarceration, Dahmer was placed in solitary confinement due to concerns for his safety. Surprisingly, upon Dahmer's request, he was transferred to a less secure unit. This proved to be the wrong move. On July 3, 1994, a fellow inmate, Osvaldo Durruti, attempted to slash Dahmer's throat with a razor embedded in a toothbrush as Dahmer sat in the prison chapel. Although he survived the attack, he would not be lucky a few months later. On the morning of November 28, 1994, Dahmer was discovered on the floor of the bathrooms of the gym, suffering from extreme head wounds, and was pronounced dead 1 hour later at a nearby hospital. Fellow inmate Christopher Scarver had used a metal bar to repeatedly hit Dahmer on the head till he was unconscious. Well, Dahmer had known that something like this would happen. According to Dahmer's family, he had long been ready to die and accepted any punishment which he might endure in prison. In fact, during one of the calls he had with his mom after the first attempt on his life, he said, "It doesn't matter, Mom. I don't care if something happens to me." Catherine Knight. Cannibal killer Catherine Knight lives inside the fearsome Silverwater Women's Correctional Center, formerly known as the Mulawa Correctional Center, in Western Sydney, where she's known to other inmates as the Nana. "We called her the Nana," a former fellow inmate said about Catherine Knight. "She is a gentle soul and not a criminal to me. She is a mediator at Mulawa. She's someone who sorted out problems before they got serious. She would pull the girls in and try to get them to sort out whatever it was before it ended up with someone going into segregation or getting more time added to their sentence." So how did Catherine Knight end up in jail? What led her to murder and cannibalize her victim? Catherine Knight was born and raised in an unconventional and dysfunctional family environment. Her mother, Barbara Ruffin, had been married to Jack Ruffin and lived with him in the small town of Aberdeen in New South Wales' Hunter Valley. Unfortunately, Barbara began an adulterous relationship with Ken Knight, a friend and co-worker of her then husband. When the affair was brought to light, Ken Knight and Barbara were forced to move out of town and live elsewhere. Barbara had 4 additional children with Ken, including twin girls born in 1955. Catherine was one of these twin daughters. The relationship between Ken and Barbara was not as rosy as everyone thought. Behind the scenes, Ken was a violent alcoholic who would constantly abuse his wife. Barbara, in turn, often told her daughters intimate details of herself and how much she hated men. All this happened when Catherine was still very young, which affected her later on in life. One of the effects is that she did not have close friends. In fact, apart from her twin sister, the only other person whom Catherine was close to was her uncle, Oscar Knight, a champion horseman who committed suicide in 1969. Catherine even claimed that Oscar's ghost often visited her. When she attended Muswell Brook High School, Catherine became a loner and is remembered by classmates as a bully who stood over smaller children. She was also not the sharpest tool in the shed and had to leave school at 15 years of age without having learned to read or write. At 18 years old, Catherine met her soon-to-be husband, David Stanford Kellett. The two got married 1 year later in 1974. The marriage between the two started off on the wrong foot, as Catherine tried to strangle Kellett on their wedding night. Catherine later explained it was because he fell asleep after only having intercourse 3 times. This was not the end of the violent episodes, as on one occasion, a heavily pregnant Catherine burned all of Kellett's clothing and shoes before hitting him across the back of the head with a frying pan, simply because he had arrived home late. Kellett couldn't take it any longer and eventually left. After being with several men, Catherine moved in with John Charles Thomas Price in 1995. This would turn out to be the worst decision, as Catherine's dreadful crime would take place just 5 years later. As time went by, their relationship started going downhill, partly because of Catherine's rages, which saw her assault Price on a number of occasions. The fighting became even more frequent, and most of his friends would no longer have anything to do with him while they remained together. Finally fed up, Price decided to take action. On the 29th of February 2000, Price stopped at the Scone Magistrates Court on his way to work and took out a restraining order in an attempt to keep Catherine away from both himself and his children. While he was sleeping, Catherine went to work, stabbing Price 37 times and then expertly flaying his body with her favorite knife. She made a skin suit which she hung from a meat hook and then decapitated him and boiled up his head on his kitchen stove with vegetables and gravy. She even set plates with the names of Price's children, as she planned to serve his body parts to his children. Catherine's initial offer to plead guilty to manslaughter was rejected, and she was charged with murdering Price, to which she entered a plea of not guilty. However, as the jury was being selected, Catherine changed her plea to guilty, and the jury was dismissed. Subsequently, Supreme Court Justice Barry O'Keefe handed Knight a life sentence, with no chance of ever being released. Being the first woman killer to be given life without any possibility of parole, the story gripped the nation that even a book about her was written. The book, Green is the New Black, even, details her life inside the fearsome Silverwater Women's Correctional Center. As it turns out, the prison officers never take their eyes off her, and she's not allowed near knives. In fact, she can't even have a cellmate in case she kills again. Catherine was stuck in a factory every day from 8 a.m. to 1 p.m. making headphones. She's said to be one of the best workers in the headphone factory and commands the top wage. However, according to the book, 4 guards flank her, watch her every move, and are with her every day. Surprisingly, her behavior behind bars is totally different from what she was in the outside world. She would stop girls stealing from each other and stop girls from fighting, but she never did it by standing over anyone. She never raised her hands to anyone. She was just someone who everyone loved. One inmate said about Catherine, while the inmates love and adore her, the prison guards have a different take on her. She's the top boss of the jail, one officer said. She takes no crap from anyone and absolutely gives it to the guards. If you come in to search her cell, she will stand in front of you with a smug face and scream at you. One thing is for sure, it does seem like a bad idea for anyone to mess with her. Armin Maves. The story of Armin Maves is unlike any other cannibal out there. He was not a murderer like the others on this list. His story is one that shook many back in 2001 and sparked off a fiery debate. Armin was born on the 1st of December 1961 and was the only child of Waltrud Maves. He had 2 older half-brothers from his father's previous relationship with another woman. Unfortunately, his father abandoned him when he was 8, leaving him to be raised by his mother. Armin described himself as feeling very lonesome after the family had fallen apart. In his adolescent years, he became fascinated by the German fairy tale, Hansel and Gretel. This fascination would eventually lead him to commit an unthinkable act that would see him spend a lifetime in prison. For extra context, in the fairy tale, Hansel and Gretel are siblings who are abandoned in a forest and fall into the hands of a witch who lives in a gingerbread and candy house. The witch, who has cannibalistic intentions, intends to fatten Hansel before eventually eating him. However, Gretel saves her brother by pushing the witch into her own oven, killing her, and escaping with the witch's treasure. While most children would marvel at the heroics displayed by Gretel to save her brother, Armin's attention was captured by the witch. Something about her wanting to eat the small boy fascinated young Armin, who would harbor the desire to replicate the witch's habit into his adult life. There was just one problem. Armin was not a killer. He did not have it in himself to become violent to satisfy his desires. So, he did the only thing he knew could work. He decided to look for someone who would willingly accept to be killed and their body cannibalized. Looking for a willing volunteer, Armin posted an advertisement on the then active website, The Cannibal Cafe, a now defunct forum for people with a cannibalism fetish. Armin's advertisement stated that he was looking for a well-built 18 to 25-year-old to be slaughtered and then consumed. Sure enough, Armin had his volunteer. Bernd Jürgen Armando Brandes, a 43-year-old engineer from Berlin, answered the advertisement in March 2001. Interestingly, many other people responded to the advertisement but later grew cold feet and backed out. Armin and Brandes met on the 9th of March 2001 in Armin's home, where they agreed to film the entire gruesome ordeal. They started with Brandes swallowing 20 sleeping pills and a bottle of cough syrup. The two then agreed to cut off Brandes' for them to eat it together. Brandes initially insisted Armin attempt to bite the body part off. This did not work, and ultimately Armin used a knife to remove it. Brandes even tried to eat some of it raw but could not, because it was too tough and chewy. Armin then fried the body part in a pan with salt, pepper, wine, and garlic. This did not go to plan as it became too burnt to be consumed. He then chopped the up into chunks and fed it to his dog. Armin proceeded to run his volunteer a bath before going to read a Star Trek book while checking in every 15 minutes. All this time, Brandes lay bleeding in the bath, drifting in and out of consciousness. After long hesitation and prayer, Armin killed Brandes by stabbing him in the throat, after which he hung the body on a meat hook. Armin dismembered and ate the corpse over the next 10 months, storing body parts in his freezer under pizza boxes and consuming up to 20 kilograms or 44 pounds of the flesh. The incident was recorded on a 4-hour videotape, which has never been released to the public due to its gruesome contents. There is a rumor that 4 screenshots of the video can be found online, but the credibility of the screenshots has never been proven. Fascinated by the incident, Armin went back to the internet to look for more volunteers. However, in December 2002, a college student alerted authorities to new advertisements for victims online. German authorities swung into action and searched Armin's home. There they found body parts and the videotape of the killing, and he was subsequently arrested. Although Armin was diagnosed with a schizoid personality, he was deemed fit to stand trial. On the 30th of January 2004, he was convicted of manslaughter and sentenced to 8 years and 6 months in prison. The case attracted considerable media attention and sparked a debate. Many people questioned whether he belonged in jail since his victim had willingly accepted to be killed and cannibalized. Nevertheless, Armin admitted to cannibalizing Brandes and expressed regret for his actions, and he was whisked to jail. Unfortunately, just 1 year after he began his sentence, a German court ordered a retrial after prosecutors appealed his sentence. They argued that he should have been convicted of murder because he killed for sexual gratification, a motive proved by his having video videotaped the crime. The court ruled that the original trial had ignored the significance of the video in disproving the argument that Armin only killed because he had been asked to kill. More bad news followed, as at his retrial, a psychologist stated that Armin could reoffend, as he still had fantasies about devouring the flesh of young people. Now, there was no way the courts would let him go and put the public in danger. And true to that, on the 10th of May 2006, a court in Frankfurt convicted Armin of murder and sentenced him to life imprisonment. While in jail, Armin became a vegetarian and urged people like him to go for treatment, so it doesn't escalate as it did with him. Since this is a unique case, some prison rules have been relaxed for him. As of 2020, Armin has been allowed to go outside of prison for supervised excursions in disguise around town in a different state. It's crazy how much trust even guards have with him, showing that he was never a violent criminal. Nikolai Jumagaliev. From Germany to now Kazakhstan, Nikolai Ispolovich Jumagaliev is believed to have killed and cannibalized at least 10 people, targeting mainly women. Shockingly, his atrocities were carried out in a span of only 2 years, between 1979 and 1980. Nikolai was considered by all who knew him as a well-spoken, clean-shaven gentleman who was always neatly dressed. However, he had one physical flaw that everyone who knew him would look past. He possessed white metal teeth, losing his natural teeth years before. This later earned him the nickname Metal Fang. Though not exactly a loner, Nikolai would generally keep to himself, walking around town trying to meet different women wherever he went. His favorite spot in town was near a riverbank, where he would meet a young lady and lure her into the dark end of the park nearby. There, he would then abuse the woman and finish off by hacking the body up with a knife and axe he carried at all times. However, he wasn't done yet. He would then proceed to cook up parts of his victims and eat their flesh. The rest he would bag up in a sack and take home with him. Later on, when he was discovered, police realized that Nikolai was also often inclined to throw little get-togethers with friends where he would cook up large amounts of meat to be shared with his guests. These get-togethers were always thrown right after one of his murders. He was feeding his unwitting guests parts of his recent kill. What is surprising is that Nikolai had been arrested and charged several other times for killing people, but never stayed in jail for long. For example, in August 1979, while in a drunken stupor, he accidentally shot a fellow fireman, for which he was arrested. However, he was diagnosed with schizophrenia, and in less than a year, he was released and returned to the outside world, where he would continue his killing spree. There are two popular stories told about how Nikolai was finally arrested. The lesser-known one claims that two town drunks who were invited back to his house for some snacks led police to Nikolai. Upon entering the home, the drunks discovered a woman's head, along with intestines, in the kitchen, ready for cooking. The most told story of his arrest claims that Nikolai's 9th murder was the one that led to his capture. He invited some friends and their girlfriends to his home. However, driven by his urge to murder, Nikolai ended up killing one of his friends and began to dismember him in the next room. When the other guests came looking for them and saw what was happening, they fled in horror from the house and reported it to the police. The arriving policeman caught the cannibal on his knees, smeared with blood. The police were so shocked at what they found that the cannibal was able to escape. He fled to the mountains naked, with a hatchet in his hands. He was tracked down and taken into custody the next day, on December 19, 1980. Nikolai's stay in jail was not like other cannibals on this list. Since he had previously been diagnosed with schizophrenia, he was again declared insane and remanded to a special treatment center, where he spent the next 8 years. On August 29, 1989, while being transferred to an ordinary mental hospital, Nikolai managed to escape using the car in which he was being transported and was declared a fugitive. After 2 years on the run, it became harder and harder to hide as the authorities intensified their search for him. So he decided to divert attention from his hideout and put investigators on the wrong track by making them think that he was in Moscow. He asked a friend to take a letter he had written to a friend in Bishkek and mail it from Moscow. The letter ended with the words, "Now I will return soon. There are a lot of beautiful women here. No one will notice their loss." His stratagem worked, as the press and various publications spread the rumors that the killer was in the capital. However, his time on the run was cut short when he was finally arrested in 1991. Currently, he is isolated from society and is incarcerated in a specialized psychiatric clinic. He once filed an application to be given the death penalty, but it was regarded by experts as a symptom of the deterioration of his condition. Antron Singleton. And now back to the United States, where a celebrity was sentenced for murder and cannibalism. Born on September 15, 1976, Antron Singleton, better known by his stage name Big Lurch, was an American rapper and poet. So how did Big Lurch find himself behind bars for such an atrocious crime? Big Lurch grew up in Dallas, Texas, where he began writing poetry at age 7. He then started his rap career as a member of the hip-hop group Cosmic Slop Shop. The group fell apart in 1999, after releasing their album Day Family in 1998, and Singleton pursued a solo career which was cut short in 2002. Drugs played a major role in his rap career, coming to a premature end. On April 10, 2002, 25-year-old Singleton murdered his 21-year-old roommate Tanisha Isaias in the apartment he shared with her and her boyfriend in Los Angeles, California. Tanisha's boyfriend, Thomas Moore, even testified that he and Singleton spent the evening prior to the murder smoking PCP. Tanisha's body was found in her apartment at night by a friend. Her chest had been torn open, and a 3-inch blade was found broken off in her scapula. Teeth marks were also found on her face and on her lungs, which had been torn from her chest. The friend testified that Big Lurch was naked and covered in blood, standing on the street and staring at the sky. A medical examination performed shortly after his capture found human flesh in his stomach that was not his own. Had drugs really led the rapper and poet to kill his innocent victim? Well, PCP, also known as angel dust, is a dissociative anesthetic, mainly used recreationally for its significant mind-altering effects. PCP is known to cause hallucinations, distorted perceptions of sounds, and violent behavior in its users. Like many other drugs, PCP has been known to alter mood states in an unpredictable fashion, causing some individuals to become detached and others to become animated. PCP may induce feelings of strength, power, and invulnerability, as well as a numbing effect on the mind. Big Lurch did not have any history with violent behavior. In fact, given the industry that he was in, the rapper did not have any negative encounters with the law prior to this incident. This can only lead us to conclude that the drugs he took that day got the better of him, and he ultimately committed the unthinkable. In fact, during his trial, Big Lurch pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity at the time of the murder, as his defense argued that the rapper was in a psychotic state due to his use of PCP the night before the murder. Despite his defense's best efforts, the court ruled that his intoxication and claimed insanity were not satisfactory reasons for committing the crime. The DA argued that drug use couldn't be used as grounds for an insanity plea in California, which the judge agreed with. Interestingly, some of the rapper's lyrics where he praised fictional and real killers were used as evidence in court. In his song I Did It To You, the rapper sings Jason Voorhees, Michael Myers, Freddy Krueger, Jeffrey Dahmer, Charles Manson, and all of your friends, I'm a finst to school ya. On November 7, 2003, Singleton was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. While locked up, Big Lurch's life has not been pleasant. While on an interview with Vlad TV, the rapper revealed that he has had numerous altercations with prison guards and even ending up in solitary confinement a few times. In 2003, the victim's mom, Carolyn Stinson, filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Singleton, his bodyguard, Stress Free Records, Death Row Records, and Isaias' boyfriend. The suit charged that the labels had provided Singleton with drugs to encourage him to act out in an extremely violent manner so as to make him more marketable as a gangsta rapper. The lawsuit claimed that part of what made a gangsta rapper marketable was the fact that they participated in violent activities. Death Row protested it had no connection to Singleton and was dropped from the lawsuit. Carolyn even believed that Tanisha's boyfriend Forrest set up Antron. Forrest was abusive, and Tanisha was going to leave him on the day she was murdered. According to Carolyn, Tanisha had an injury on the back of her neck from a kid's scooter, and the scooter had a bloody handprint on it, but the handprint wasn't Big Lurch's, and it wasn't brought up in court. Other evidence not used included a footprint, bloody fingerprints on doors, and a shoe at the back door. DNA evidence was gathered, but then the police lost it. The DNA did not match Antron. Carolyn believed that the condition of Tanisha's body shows that the killer hated Tanisha, and that a PCP high wouldn't cause that type of malicious murder. Big Lurch has also revealed in interviews that he believes that he was set up. He even claimed that there were young dogs at the house, pit bulls, and that police did not look at the bite marks on Tanisha to see if they were canines. His account of what happened that night leaves more questions than answers. According to the rapper, the night of Tanisha's murder, there was a party at the house and PCP was passed around. A common method of consumption, and the method used that night, was a liquid that cigarettes get dipped in and then smoked. According to Big Lurch, they kept feeding the drug to him. So much was given to to him that it stood out as strange to him at the time. The next thing he knew, he woke up in jail 2 weeks later with a murder charge. He wasn't aware of his surroundings for a full 2 weeks, and he discovered that he already had a lawyer, Milton Grimes, the same man who owned the record label that he had just joined. He also discovered he was on the antipsychotic drug haloperidol, and his lawyer began to tell him that they needed to make the case look as bad as possible so that he'd be sent to a psychiatric hospital. All this, according to the rapper, was some sort of cover-up to help the real killers go scot-free while he went to prison. According to the victim's mom, the rapper didn't kill Tanisha. She believed that he was high on PCP and perhaps saw a piece of Tanisha's lung and picked it up to eat it, thinking it was a bit of food laying around. Carolyn believes he should have another trial where all evidence is admitted. Regardless of the truth behind the murder, this story remains one of the most gruesome in hip-hop history. Stephen Griffiths.
Chilling images of an admitted serial killer committing one of his shocking crimes.
Stephen Sean Griffiths, later known as the Crossbow Cannibal, was born in 1969 in Yorkshire, England, to his father, a frozen food salesman, and his mother, a telephonist. His parents divorced when Stephen was 13, leaving him to stay with his mother, an unstable woman with a criminal record. Apparently, on at least one occasion, Stephen would watch his mother sleep with multiple men in the garden. During his teenage years, Griffiths descended into petty crime. He would shoplift from stores and steal from classmates. However, when he was 17 years old, Griffith used a knife to slash the face of a store clerk who tried to stop him from shoplifting. This offense got Griffith sentenced to 3 years in youth custody. While in prison, Stephen Griffiths divulged to prison guards and psychiatrists that he fantasized about being a serial killer. This probably should have been enough to keep Stephen Griffiths under close surveillance. But after his sentence was complete, he was released back onto the streets with limited supervision. His knife-wielding terror activities continued in 1992 when he was sentenced to 2 years in prison for holding a knife to the throat of a young girl. After his stint in prison this time, he ramped up his interest in serial killers and began taking out a bunch of books about his favorite murders. A personal favorite of Griffiths was Peter Sutcliffe, alias the Yorkshire Ripper, who was convicted of the murder of 13 women, most of them sex workers. Griffiths was so intrigued with this lifestyle that in 2003, he earned a bachelor's degree in psychology at the University of Bradford, and then enrolled in a PhD program in homicide studies a year later. During this time, he was also very active on the internet, downloading violent pornography and leaving foreboding messages on his MySpace page. Stephen Griffiths was a student of serial killing. He read true accounts of serial killers with a lot of enthusiasm. He also read fictional novels about serial killers with many quotes from these real and fictional serial killers, as well as his own twisted thoughts being posted all over his MySpace page, where he called himself Ven Pariah, a character from demonology. This MySpace page seemed to be an expression of his violent alter ego, one that would eventually get the better of him and commit gruesome murders. In fact, the night before killing one of his victims, he posted, "What will this pseudo-human do?" One wonders. Poor Stephen pretended to be me, but he was only the wrapping. He knew towards the end that I supplied the inner core of iron, hatred bound tightly in flesh. At very long last, the time has come to act out. For about a decade, Stephen Griffiths moved about the streets of Bradford, befriending the sex workers. One of the sex workers who worked in the area at the time told investigators that Griffiths didn't seem like a dangerous man. However, even as he made friends with local sex workers, he was planning on actualizing his sick fantasies. In 2009, Griffiths would follow in Peter Sutcliffe's footsteps and invited Susie Rushworth, a sex worker, back to his apartment. He then shot Rushworth with a crossbow, killing her before dismembering her body in his bathtub. The next year, he would do the very same thing with his second victim, Shelley Armitage. It is believed that he would keep parts of the victims' bodies to eat later, sometimes cooking them and sometimes eating them raw. The parts of the bodies that he didn't eat were put into garbage bags and tossed into a nearby lake. The third and final murder of Suzanne Blamires was a little bit different. Griffiths held Blamires hostage in his apartment for 2 days. However, she was eventually able to break free from bondage, at which point she opened the door to the apartment and ran down the hall. Unfortunately, Griffiths chased her into the hallway, crossbow in hand, and shot and killed her as she tried to escape. However, as Griffiths turned around, he noticed a CCTV camera that had captured the entire incident. He casually walked past the camera and flipped his middle finger. He then gave Suzanne Blamires the same treatment that he gave the others, eating parts of her and dumping other parts of her in the lake. After the murder of Blamires, the caretakers of Griffiths' apartment building reviewed the CCTV footage, saw the hideous crime that had been committed, and immediately alerted law enforcement. Shortly after, the police raided Griffiths' apartment, where he was waiting calmly for them to arrest him. Inside the apartment, the police found remnants of the victims' bodies, as well as their photos. one of which clearly depicted the dead body of Shelley Armitage in the bathtub. On the 21st of December 2010, Griffiths was convicted of all 3 murders after pleading guilty, sentenced Griffiths to life imprisonment with a whole life order, meaning he will not become eligible for parole and is likely to spend the rest of his life in prison. His time in jail has not been pleasant as well, owing to the fact that he has tried to kill himself on more than one occasion. On one occasion, in 2011, he went on a 120-day hunger strike, during which time he avoided contact with other people. On another occasion, he pulled a plastic bag over his head and tied his socks around the bottom of the bag to try to suffocate himself. Officers rushed to the cell and found him unconscious, but he quickly recovered after the bag was pulled free. The crossbow killer continues to live out his days behind bars. If you enjoyed this video, click on the boxes playing on your screen to watch similar content.